The Crystilleries of Echoland, written by Dew Pellucid, narrated by B.J. Harrison. Chapter 1. The Gravestone Book. Will Cleary walked into his father's dusty library. At the centre, a huge book was spread open on a pedestal, like a bird with papery wings, and like a bird, the book was trapped in a cage of glass that reflected Will's face back at him. The 12-year-old boy looked like a scarecrow with big, sad eyes. "Dad?" He frowned at the wing chair opposite. Mr. Cleary's face was hidden by his newspaper, and since he was puffing on a pipe, the newspaper smoked like a chimney. "The plant from beyond the pond." Will took down a jar of leaves from a second pedestal. "It can glow." "Of course," answered the newspaper, unsurprised. "No, I mean—" Will fidgeted, and his hand bumped into his pet wolf. The leaves inside the jar began to glow at once. "Only when Dea's around." "It glows for Damien, too," his father said abruptly, turning a crinkling page. A falcon was perched on the winged armchair. The bird seemed to raise its eyebrow at Will, but of course birds have no eyebrows. "Why didn't you say so before?" Will blinked sadly. His father didn't seem to hear him. "Emmy and I disappeared at the same time, right?" Will raised his voice. He was looking at the book again. The same page was always on display inside the glass case. He learned to read by learning its words. He knew them by heart. "Will," his father interrupted, peering over the rim of his glasses. His bloodshot eyes looked huge behind the thick lenses. "How am I ever going to find your twin sister if you keep distracting me?" "How will you find her in a newspaper?" Will muttered to himself. Then he raised the glass lid and took out the heavy volume. The cover looked like a gravestone. "Dea and Damien brought me back with this plant." He talked to himself, really, though the bright leaves in the jar nodded as if listening. "So why didn't we try it all over? With the plant, I mean. I'll bring the book back after," he decided, and left the library. The wolf and falcon followed him as he put on his coat. The glowing weed lit his way through the dirty house. Cobwebs clung to his hair as he stepped outside. On the front door, a knocker shone like a tiny moon. A larger sphere glowed on the porch bench like a strange basketball. Will walked over, tucking the book and jar in his coat. Then he picked up the luminous ball. Inside, the numbers 8 and 1 floated around, telling time as in an ordinary clock. It was a little past 8 in the morning, but in Alaska, winter mornings are as black as midnight. Will's heart beat like a drum as he left his home. Of course, the hologram of a boy inside his incandescent clock left the house too. Will knew that the security camera in the pearly door knocker behind him was projecting his retreating image into his clock. But seeing himself like this, as if his life was just a movie, made him feel terribly lonely and afraid. But the wolf and falcon stayed with him. He smiled at them. They looked too worried to smile back, as if animals could smile in the first place. A broken greenhouse creaked loudly in the biting wind as they passed it. Will ran downhill. The bird flew over him. The wolf galloped behind. They stopped on the shore of a frozen pond. The sheet of ice stared at the dark sky like a pale face, and what looked like a giant white balloon hovered over the middle like a nose. "Mom!" Will waved at a stick figure. She was tugging a long hose out of the nose. "Not now, dear. The water heater is ready." The woman in the black diving suit turned a faucet and started spraying steaming water on the ice. "Did you ever look for Emmy with the plant from beyond the pond?" Will stared into the melted hole growing bigger at their feet. "Of course, Emmy will return. Like you, dear. She just needs someone to show her the way." The thin woman wasn't listening. She rested the hose on the pond, put on her diving gear, and dove into the rippling darkness. Will stared at her fading air bubbles. Then, like so many times in his life before, and even though it was too dark to read, he flipped through the gravestone book. 1,007 pages spoke of people who had simply vanished. His and Emmy's story was on page 811. No one had witnessed any of these strange disappearances. The book documented the aftermath, that's all. Broken windows, signs of struggle, bloodstains, fallen shoes. The missing people were never seen again, except for one boy who returned after a week. That boy was William Cleary. This inexplicable reappearance turned Will's life into a sort of nightmare. Strangers kept coming to his home to ask what he remembered. But he was 2 years old when it happened. How could he remember? All anyone knew was that a wolf and a falcon brought him back. He kept babbling their names, Dea, Damien. And a glowing plant was wrapped around him like a diaper of seaweeds. His pets stayed with him. The falcon went with him everywhere, even to school. The wolf watched over him at night. Will's parents never stopped looking for clues to his long-lost twin, his dad in books, his mom in the pond. One wish consumed their lives, to find a passage to that place beyond the pond, from which Will returned 10 years ago without his sister. But no one tried to do it all over again. The thought came back to Will. Only now he shivered as he remembered it, because the wind was so cold, and the dark pond looked even colder. But if he dived with the glowing plant, maybe the invisible door would open again. He didn't have a diving suit or scuba tank, but the crystal ball clock and jar of leaves lit his way as he jumped in after his mother. He knew his pets would follow him. They always did. And just in case he drowned or froze to death while looking for Emmy, he left the gravestone book on the ice to explain why he did it.